Carter had always been fascinated by the quiet hum of the shooting range. The metallic clinks of spent brass bouncing across concrete, the subtle scent of gunpowder lingering in the air, and the steady cadence of rifles being sighted in. It was a world most people didn't notice but thrived in it. On weekends, she would wake up before dawn, grab her worn leather boots and make her way to the range. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She wasn't there to prove herself. She wasn't even there to shoot. No's role was simpler yet strangely empowering. She picked up brass. It might sound mundane, even tedious, but it was a window into a world few civilians ever saw. While others were firing, she moved quietly among the lanes, collecting shells, straightening targets, and ensuring that every shooter had what they needed. She learned the names of rifles, their calibers, and the subtle differences between brands. She watched the instructors demonstrate proper stances, sight alignment, and trigger control. Her notebook, hidden under her jacket, was filled with scribbles of ballistic formulas, wind calculations, and diagrams of bullet trajectories. Most of the veterans at the range didn't pay much attention to her. They assumed she was just a civilian volunteer, a helpful face who kept the brass off the concrete and the range organized. Didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it that way. Being overlooked allowed her to observe without pressure. She could study the body language of the snipers as they adjusted their scopes, notice how their breathing changed with every careful trigger squeeze, and mentally record every minor adjustment they made for distance and wind. It was as if she were quietly collecting puzzle pieces that only she could see fitting together. Fascination wasn't sudden. It had roots in her childhood. She grew up fascinated by stories of sharpshooters, from military legends to Olympic shooters, devouring every account she could find of precision, patience, and focus. She remembered hiding behind her bedroom curtains at age 12, reading about snipers in Afghanistan, amazed at the impossible distances they achieved. The idea of connecting the physics of the world with sheer human skill fascinated her. The thought that someone could account for wind, temperature, gravity, and human heartbeat, to place a single projectile exactly where they wanted it thrilled her to no end. Her father had been an amateur hunter, teaching her the basics of firearms and safety at an early age. But the structured environment of the range, with professional shooters and disciplined military personnel, was a world apart. Quickly adapted, learning to walk quietly, to anticipate what instructors would say, and to keep her presence almost invisible. She didn't need recognition. She craved knowledge. She was like a sponge, quietly absorbing the world around her. It was a crisp autumn morning when everything began to change. The sky was a clear blue with just a hint of frost in the air, was methodically sweeping brass into a metal bucket, humming a soft tune she barely noticed she was singing. Her gloves were worn, leather soft from repeated use, and her boots scuffed from countless trips across the concrete lanes. Around her, shooters loaded magazines, tested their scopes, and exchanged casual banter. Focus, however, was entirely elsewhere. She was studying the angle of sunlight on the long-range targets, noting how shadows could obscure a shooter's view. That morning, the range's usual routine was interrupted by the arrival of a group of Marines. They moved with a confidence that immediately set them apart. Their uniforms were crisp, boots polished, and rifles meticulously maintained. Leading them was Gunnery Sergeant Mason Hale, a man whose reputation preceded him. Had heard stories of Hale, deployments in Afghanistan, countless confirmed kills at distances most civilians couldn't imagine, awards and medals that spoke of a life dedicated to precision and service. She didn't know if he would even notice her, but she continued her work, methodically collecting brass, eyes flicking up occasionally to observe. Hale's eyes scanned the range as he walked, assessing shooters, equipment, and terrain. When he spotted, crouched with her bucket in hand, he paused. Something about the way she moved caught his attention. She wasn't fumbling, wasn't nervous, and wasn't trying to appear competent. She simply was. Her attention to detail, the precision in her movements, and the calmness in her posture made her stand out in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. Hale raised an eyebrow and exchanged a glance with one of his teammates, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Who's that?" he asked quietly, nodding toward. "She's just picking up brass," came a reply. "Volunteer, doesn't really shoot much." Hale studied her for a moment longer. There was a quiet intensity in her gaze, something almost predatory yet controlled. Something told him this wasn't just another civilian who liked the smell of gunpowder. The kind of focus she exhibited, calm, deliberate, unhurried, was rare. Hale made a mental note to observe her more closely. Unaware of the attention, continued her task. She moved fluidly between lanes, sweeping brass, occasionally offering a nod or a quiet word of advice to a new shooter, demonstrating how to safely carry magazines or adjust a rifle stand. She was invisible to most, but to Hale, she was suddenly fascinating. The way she calculated distances in her head, the subtle shifts in her body when she considered the trajectory of bullets she might never fire. It was as if she was living in the world of sharpshooters without ever holding a rifle. A light breeze shifted, carrying the faint tang of gunpowder and cold autumn air. Paused for a moment, glancing at the long-range target line stretching almost a mile into the distance. She imagined the trajectory of bullets, adjusting in her mind for wind drift, mirage effects, and bullet drop. Most shooters wouldn't bother thinking beyond a few hundred meters, thought in thousands. This was her private world, a silent practice of skill, focus, and understanding. Hale walked closer, curiosity now fully piqued. He wanted to see what she knew, what she understood. Most civilians didn't grasp even basic ballistic concepts, yet moved as if she did, without pretension, without boasting. She simply existed in that space with competence and quiet authority. Hale smiled slightly, sensing the potential for something extraordinary. Little did either of them know, this moment would mark the beginning of a story that would defy expectations, challenge norms, and change life forever. As resumed her task, Hale's eyes followed her every move. Something inside him shifted, a mix of amusement and intrigue. He had no idea yet that the quiet girl collecting brass could one day attempt a shot that most trained snipers would deem impossible, and yet in her calm, methodical way, seemed perfectly capable. The stage was being set, and the first act of an incredible journey was quietly unfolding, hidden in the ordinary motions of a volunteer picking up brass. The morning sun had climbed higher when the group of Marines fully set up at the range. Their movements were crisp, efficient, and disciplined, every action precise and purposeful. They were not here for casual shooting. They were here to train, to push the limits of skill and accuracy. Leading them was Gunnery Sergeant Mason Hale, a man whose reputation in military circles was near mythical. He had faced the most dangerous environments, taken impossible shots in deserts, mountains, and survived to tell the story. Hale was not easily impressed, but that morning, something at the far end of the range caught his attention. Carter, still quietly gathering brass and tidying stations, barely looked up as the Marines arrived. Her rhythm was unbroken. Each shell she picked up clinked against the bucket in a consistent, almost musical cadence. She had learned early on that the range operated on focus and patience. Loud exclamations or unnecessary movements disrupted that rhythm. She was invisible to most, a shadow gliding between shooters, but Hale saw her. He observed her from a distance, noting her posture, the way her hands moved, and the calm in her expression. Most civilians on the range would be nervous around Marines, especially ones who carried the aura of experience and danger Hale radiated, but seemed unaffected. She didn't flinch, didn't hurry, and didn't pause her work. Hale leaned slightly toward his second-in-command. "Who's that?" he asked quietly, nodding toward her. "Just a volunteer," came the reply. "Quiet kid, picks up brass and organizes the lanes, doesn't touch the rifles much." Hale raised an eyebrow. Something about her presence was unusual. It wasn't just that she moved efficiently. It was the intent behind her actions. Most people performed tasks mechanically, performed them deliberately with awareness of every detail around her. Her eyes flicked to the distant targets, then back to the shooters, measuring angles and distances in a way that suggested understanding far beyond a casual volunteer. Curiosity, mixed with a hint of mischief, prompted Hale to approach her. He strode across the range, boots crunching lightly against the concrete, and stood behind. She didn't look up immediately, continuing her task as if he weren't there. Hale cleared his throat gently. "You ever fire one of these?" he asked, nodding toward a sniper rifle set up nearby. Paused, then looked up, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were steady, calm, and unafraid. "I've studied them," she replied quietly. "I know the basics of ballistics, wind drift, and mil-dot calculations. I haven't fired a long-range rifle much, but I understand the theory." Hale blinked. The answer was precise and confident, not rehearsed, not boastful. His team had assumed this would be a light, humorous encounter with a civilian, someone who might fumble a rifle or misunderstand terms. Instead, spoke like someone who had spent years learning, observing, and practicing, without ever touching a sniper rifle. Hale exchanged a glance with one of his men, a mixture of amusement and disbelief on his face. "Well, that's unusual," Hale said, smiling slightly. "Most people here can't even name half the adjustments on a scope. You're ahead of the curve." Shrugged modestly. "I like to learn quietly," she said. "It's easier to understand when nobody's talking over you." Hale chuckled. There was a subtle, unspoken challenge forming in the air. Most Marines would never openly test a civilian, let alone one they assumed had no experience. But Hale, intrigued and somewhat impressed, decided to push further. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Ever tried a real sniper shot?" he asked, a playful edge in his tone. Considered the question for a moment. Her pulse quickened slightly, not out of fear but excitement. The thought of firing a long-range shot, something she had only dreamed of studying, sent a thrill through her. She nodded calmly. "I'd like to try," she said softly. The Marines around Hale laughed, certain the request was naive or joking. No civilian could handle a sniper rifle with proper form, let alone understand the calculations necessary for a precise shot at extreme distance. Hale, however, remained silent, watching. There was something in the way she held herself, the way she processed information, and the quiet confidence in her tone that made him pause. "All right," Hale said, straightening. "Let's see how much you actually understand. I have a rifle here, one of the best long-range rifles you'll ever touch, but I warn you it's not forgiving." His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the .408 rifle laid out on the table. She had read about it extensively. The rifle was legendary, capable of extreme accuracy at distances beyond 4 kilometers, a tool used by only the most skilled snipers in the world. Most shooters never even saw one up close, yet didn't hesitate. She studied the rifle with careful eyes, noting its weight, balance, and scope adjustments. "Have you ever shot past 300 meters?" Hale asked, genuinely curious. "No," admitted, "but I understand the physics behind longer shots." Hale raised an eyebrow. Most people would talk themselves out of such a challenge. However, spoke with quiet certainty. Her demeanor was steady, and she seemed completely absorbed in the rifle, the range, and the concept of the shot. Hale realized this wasn't about bravado or attention, was methodical, analytical, and focused, traits he valued above all else in a sniper. The other Marines exchanged skeptical glances. One muttered under his breath, "She doesn't stand a chance." But Hale ignored them. He had seen many people fail because of doubt, nerves, or lack of preparation. He thought might just surprise everyone. "All right, here what we'll do," Hale said, setting the tone. "I'll walk you through the rifle, the scope, wind calculations, and mirage effects. Then you'll take a shot at a long-range target. Don't worry about distance yet. Let's see if you can manage the basics first." Nodded, absorbing every instruction with the same intensity she had displayed while picking up brass. She asked questions, clarified points, and demonstrated understanding far beyond what Hale expected from a civilian. The Marines around them grew quieter, watching in disbelief as internalized complex concepts almost immediately. Hale leaned back for a moment, realizing that this was no longer a casual interaction. He had challenged a quiet volunteer to consider firing a rifle used by elite snipers, and she hadn't flinched. She wasn't reckless, she was prepared. That calm focus, rare and unassuming, was exactly what made a sniper exceptional. Hale felt a spark of excitement. This was no longer about a casual visit to the range. It was the beginning of a lesson, a test, and potentially something extraordinary. His hands were steady as she practiced adjusting the rifle, even before firing a single round. Hale observed closely, noting her precision. Every adjustment, every careful movement suggested she had imagined herself in this position many times before. The other Marines were silent now, some still skeptical, others increasingly impressed. Hale's curiosity had shifted into genuine intrigue. He wondered if this quiet, meticulous volunteer could do what few trained professionals ever attempted. As the sun climbed higher, prepared herself, reviewing the calculations in her head, checking wind direction and visualizing the shot. Hale stood beside her, giving measured instructions, while the other Marines watched in awe. Carter, the girl who had only been picking up brass minutes ago, was about to enter a world of skill, precision, and challenge that few ever faced. And Hale, for the first time in years, felt the thrill of witnessing someone who might actually surprise him. The stage was set. What began as a routine morning at the shooting range was transforming into something extraordinary, with at the center. Quiet, focused, and determined, she was about to show the Marines that sometimes the most remarkable talent hides where nobody expects it. The crisp autumn morning had shifted into late morning, the sun now high enough to cast long, sharp shadows across the range. Stood beside the .408 rifle Hale had laid out, her hands lightly tracing the stock, the barrel, and the massive scope. It was a weapon of precision, a sniper's dream, and a casual civilian's nightmare. The Marines around her exchanged doubtful glances. Most of them believed the rifle should never leave Hale's hands for someone like a quiet volunteer who spent her weekends picking up brass. Hale, however, was already intrigued. There was a spark in her eyes, a combination of calm focus and intellectual curiosity that drew him in. He had seen this look before in elite snipers he trained, though rarely in civilians. "All right," Hale said, standing behind her, "I'm going to give you a basic rundown. This rifle isn't forgiving. Every mistake magnifies with distance. Understand me?" Nodded. Her eyes followed his every movement, absorbing details faster than Hale could speak them. She had studied the online, read every ballistic chart and watched videos of it in action. But now, seeing it in her hands, she realized theory and reality were two different worlds. The weight was substantial and the recoil was notorious. Hale noticed her slight hesitation and smiled inwardly. She understood the stakes. "First thing you need to know," Hale continued, "is the ballistics. At extreme ranges, wind, temperature, humidity, and even the Earth's rotation can affect the bullet. You're not just pulling a trigger, you're calculating physics in real time." His lips curved into a slight, focused smile. "I've read about drift," she said quietly. "It's minor at shorter distances, but at long range it's crucial." Hale's eyes widened slightly. Most of the people who attempted to touch the didn't know such terms. "Impressive," he said. "You're ahead of the curve, but knowing theory isn't the same as applying it." He motioned to a large, steel silhouette target set almost 4 kilometers away, a distance that even the most experienced snipers regarded as ambitious. "That's your target," he said. "Under normal circumstances, few even try beyond 1,500 meters. This one, it's, let's just say, extreme." Studied the target, squinting against the sunlight reflecting off the metal. In her mind, she began calculating trajectory, bullet drop, and wind effect. Her fingers traced invisible lines in the air, as if following the path the bullet might take. The other Marines shifted uncomfortably. They had expected this to be a joke, a teaching moment that would amuse everyone, but the calm determination in his posture unsettled them. Hale's challenge wasn't just casual teasing anymore. He leaned closer and said quietly, "Want to take it a step further? I'll set the scope for 4,000 meters, Most snipers wouldn't even try it without days of preparation. You want to attempt it? Paused for just a moment, then nodded. Show me the wind pattern and I'll try. The room went silent. One of the younger Marines muttered, "She can't be serious." Hale didn't answer. He wasn't laughing, he was curious and slightly wary. There was a rare quality in that made him reconsider every assumption he had about civilians on a range. Most people who attempted a 4,000-meter shot never even made it halfway. Most didn't survive the recoil or the mental strain. Yet, with her calm eyes and steady breathing, seemed ready. Hale set her up on the shooting mat, checking her positioning and stance. Recoil will be strong. Keep your body tight against the rifle and control your breathing. Every fraction of a degree matters. If you flinch even slightly, you miss. Nodded again. She adjusted the rifle against her shoulder, her fingers lightly gripping the trigger and fore end, her eyes scanning the distant scope. Hale watched every movement, silently impressed by her focus. Even the veterans around them leaned in, sensing something extraordinary was unfolding. "Let's start with calculations," Hale said, producing a ballistic chart and a small handheld device. "You need to account for wind speed, air density, mirage, and distance. Start by telling me your adjustments." Studied the data, her mind moving rapidly. She pointed out subtle wind shifts, noted the temperature's effect on air density, and even considered mirage patterns caused by sunlight reflecting off the concrete and dirt. Hale's jaw tightened slightly. Her knowledge wasn't just bookish. It was applied, practical, and meticulous. "Impressive," Hale muttered. "You're thinking like a sniper, not a student." His gaze returned to the rifle and target. She had mentally plotted the trajectory, factored in every adjustment, and considered contingencies for minor errors. Her pulse was calm, almost imperceptible, but her focus radiated determination. Hale, who had trained countless snipers, realized he might be witnessing something extraordinary, a civilian with the potential to execute a shot at a distance that belief. The Marines around them were no longer joking. Some whispered to each other, their previous amusement replaced by quiet awe. Who had once been invisible, now commanded attention through presence alone. Hale prepared her scope for the first attempt, explaining minute adjustments for elevation and windage. He guided her hands on the rifle, but her grip, her sight alignment, and her calm approach required almost no correction. "Ready?" Hale asked, stepping back slightly. Inhaled slowly, aligning the scope with the distant target. She visualized the bullet's path, from rifle to target, accounting for every factor Hale had explained. Her mind was a calm storm of calculations and focus, her hands steady as steel. She nodded slightly. Hale's voice softened, almost a whisper. "This is more than practice. You're about to attempt a shot most snipers never dream of on a first try. Don't overthink it, but stay precise." Exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger gently, and waited for the recoil. She knew the rifle would roar and her body would feel every ounce of the round's energy. But she didn't flinch. The other Marines instinctively stepped back, half in awe, half in anticipation of a failed attempt. As fired, the rifle bucked, a tremendous force running through her body. She held firm, watching through the scope, her focus unwavering. Hale's heart raced. This was the moment that would reveal whether she was merely confident or whether she truly had the skills, instincts, and understanding necessary for extreme-range precision. The bullet streaked across the range, a blur against the distant horizon. Time seemed to slow as all eyes followed its trajectory. The other Marines exchanged anxious, incredulous glances. Hale, normally unshakable, felt a rare thrill of anticipation. He had pushed into the impossible, and now the result would determine everything. Held her position, eyes fixed on the target, waiting. She didn't move, didn't second-guess. Every calculation, every adjustment, every observation she had made in the past months, years even, converged in this one moment. She had trained her mind, if not yet her body, for this impossible task, and now it was about to be tested in reality. The stage was set, the target distant, and the challenge monumental. The quiet volunteer, who once moved unnoticed among spent brass and rifles, was no longer invisible. She had been seen, and she was about to demonstrate that her knowledge, patience, and focus could transcend every expectation. Hale watched her, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. The challenge had been issued. Now it was time to see if theory could meet reality, and whether Carter could turn curiosity into history. The crisp air had grown warmer as the morning shifted into late noon, yet a chill still lingered over the range. Stood over the .408 rifle, her fingers lightly brushing its stock and barrel, familiarizing herself with the beastly weapon. Hale watched intently, nodding her quiet precision. Every movement she made was deliberate, each gesture careful, each breath measured. She was no longer the casual volunteer who had arrived to sweep brass. She was something else entirely, a civilian with the focus and mind of a seasoned marksman. Hale crouched beside her, showing her how to tighten her cheek weld, adjust her grip, and steady her stance against the massive recoil of the rifle. "This isn't a light weapon," he said softly. "If you don't handle it correctly, it will punish you. Recoil can throw off alignment for the next shot, and at this distance, every millimeter matters." Nodded. She had read about recoil and felt it in theory, but now, with the rifle poised and ready, it was a physical reality she needed to respect. She adjusted her body, bending slightly at the knees, keeping her core tight. Hale's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, ensuring balance, but she barely needed it. Her calm confidence was astonishing. "Now," Hale continued, "we talk ballistics. At 4,000 meters, gravity, wind, temperature, humidity, and even the effect, all of it affects the bullet. You have to calculate everything before the trigger is squeezed." His mind went to work, pulling out the mental models she had studied. She envisioned the bullet's flight path, accounted for wind drift, and factored in even minor mirage distortions caused by the heat rising from the concrete range. Hale's eyebrows lifted slightly. Most trained snipers would need calculators, charts, and computers for these adjustments. However, was already thinking through them mentally, with the clarity and precision of someone who had studied these factors for years. Hale handed her a small ballistic calculator. "Most people need this to survive 2,000 meters. You'll see that at 4,000 it's nearly essential. But let's see if you understand the principles first." Took it, studying the numbers carefully. She adjusted for wind direction, noting subtle movements of flags in the distance. She considered humidity, which would affect air density and the bullet's speed. She glanced at the scope, imagining how the target would appear through the glass at that extreme distance. Hale's Marines were silently observing, some whispering to one another, still skeptical yet increasingly intrigued. "Breathing control is key," Hale said. "You need to time your shot between breaths to minimize body movement. Any twitch can throw the round off by meters." Inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and adjusted her position again. Her body was tense but relaxed, her focus absolute. She followed Hale's instructions, but it was clear she didn't merely imitate them. She internalized each step, adapting with a natural precision that left Hale momentarily speechless. Hale's eyes scanned the surrounding terrain. From the range's observation tower, the steel silhouette target was barely visible in the distance, a tiny glint that might be lost to anyone without careful focus. The distance was almost laughably long to most shooters, yet studied it as if it were 10 meters away. She noted elevation changes, subtle dips in the valley, and even areas where wind might swirl unpredictably. "You're thinking too much," one of the younger Marines whispered to another. "She's just a volunteer." Hale ignored him. He had seen this before. Dismissing someone like was a mistake most shooters made only once. His focus and methodical approach were the hallmarks of someone capable of extraordinary precision. "Okay," Hale said, finally giving her a chance to place the rifle. "Align the scope, visualize the shot, and take it slow. You'll need to squeeze gently, anticipate the recoil, and maintain alignment for the follow-up if necessary." Positioned herself carefully, her eye through the scope. She studied the target, noting its exact location relative to surrounding terrain features. Her mind traced the bullet's likely path, adjusting for every known variable. She felt her pulse steadying, her body temperature rising slightly as adrenaline mingled with focus. This was a real shot, a real test, and she treated it with the reverence it demanded. Hale crouched behind her, offering measured guidance. "Wind," he said, "is variable. Watch the flags on the ridge, adjust accordingly. This isn't static. The bullet will drift. Calculate carefully." His eyes flicked to the distant ridge where flags rippled in a subtle breeze. She noted the minor shifts, mentally adjusting her elevation and aim. Her training, quiet, self-directed, and obsessive, was converging in this one moment. Every weekend she had spent observing snipers, noting distances, and reading ballistic charts was now more than theory. It was practice in preparation for a shot that many deemed impossible. "Check your breathing," Hale instructed. "Remember, timing is everything. You'll have one chance to make this work, maybe two if conditions allow." Inhaled slowly, held it for a beat, and exhaled gently. She felt the rifle's weight settle, the balance shift against her shoulder. Her finger hovered above the trigger. Hale could see her muscles tense, then relax, every motion perfectly timed to her breath. The other Marines watched in silence. Skepticism had given way to curiosity, then to disbelief. The quiet civilian, previously ignored, now commanded full attention. Hale's mind raced with possibilities. Could she actually manage a 4,000-meter shot? Could someone without years of field experience accomplish something even he had rarely attempted? The potential was staggering, yet everything in its behavior suggested she might just pull it off. Hale handed her a small handheld anemometer to verify wind speed and direction, adjusted her calculations, cross-referencing with her mental notes. Each step was deliberate. She was methodical, never rushed, never hesitant. The rifle, once a foreign and intimidating tool, now seemed almost like an extension of her body, responsive to every micro-adjustment she made. "Okay," Hale said finally, "we're ready." Scope adjusted, wind accounted for, breathing under control. This is it. Remember, one shot, full concentration, no distractions. Nodded, her calm exterior masking the thrill surging inside her. She settled the rifle firmly, took one last careful glance at the distant steel target, and visualized the entire trajectory from rifle to impact. 4 kilometers was no longer a number. It was a path, a challenge, a problem waiting to be solved. Hale's voice softened to a near whisper, almost a meditation. "Trust yourself. You've prepared for this. Now execute." Exhaled gently, squeezing the trigger with precision, her body perfectly aligned to absorb the recoil. The rifle barked sharply, the massive round leaving a trail invisible to the naked eye. Hale's heart pounded as he watched the scope, watching the path she had mentally plotted become reality. The other Marines leaned in, some shielding their eyes, some holding their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause in anticipation. The bullet streaked across the open range, a high-speed tracer of focus, calculation, and courage. Time seemed to slow. Every microsecond stretched into eternity as held her position, unwavering, calm, and completely in control. Hale's mind raced, calculating probabilities and distances, but he dared not speak. Had prepared for this moment her entire life in quiet observation, careful study, and obsessive attention to detail. All of her weekend hours, all of her mental calculations, and all of her silent ambition were about to be tested in a single instant. She was no longer a volunteer picking up brass. She was a contender in a domain most people didn't even believe she could enter. The stage was set. The impossible was within reach. The outcome, uncertain but charged with anticipation, would soon be revealed, and it would change everything. The range had fallen into an unusual silence. The distant hum of activity, the clang of rifles, the shuffle of boots, the metallic ring of brass hitting concrete, had all but disappeared. All attention now focused on the lone figure of Carter, crouched behind the massive .408 sniper rifle. Hale stood a few feet behind her, ready to coach, but cautious not to interfere. Even he, with decades of sniper experience, felt a rare tension in his chest. The shot she was about to attempt would test not just skill, but courage, composure, and precision on a level most soldiers never encountered in their lifetimes. His hands rested lightly on the rifle, her fingers poised on the trigger and fore-end. Her legs were firmly braced, core tight against the rifle's weight, and her breathing perfectly synchronized. She had visualized this moment countless times, calculating wind adjustments, bullet drop, mirage distortions, and even the micro-vibrations of the rifle caused by her heartbeat. This was not impulsive bravery. It was the quiet culmination of meticulous preparation. Hale watched every micro-movement, impressed by her discipline and control. "Wind steady," Hale whispered, pointing toward the flags along the distant ridge. But minor gusts at extreme range can alter trajectory. Adjust slightly, half a mil to the right. His eyes followed the flags, noting subtle flickers in the fabric. Her mind ran calculations at lightning speed, converting every subtle shift into a precise adjustment in her scope. She nodded minutely, made the necessary changes to the windage dial, and exhaled slowly. Time seemed to stretch. Every Marine present, veterans, spectators, and instructors alike, watched in tense silence. None dared to break it. The quiet determination of a young volunteer had turned the range into a theater of anticipation. Hale leaned slightly closer, his voice soft. "Remember, your breathing, your trigger control, your follow-through, all of it matters. One misstep in the round will be wasted. Focus." Inhaled gently, held her breath for a precise beat, and positioned herself against the rifle. Her finger hovered above the trigger, ready to squeeze with absolute precision. The scope framed the distant steel target, a tiny glint at an almost unimaginable distance. She visualized the bullet's journey, mentally accounting for every factor Hale had taught her: gravity, wind, mirage, temperature, and even drift. The first microsecond of recoil would test her control. The rifle was heavy, the round powerful, and even a minor flinch could send it veering meters off course. Hale watched closely, ready to correct, but he knew she had to execute this herself. Experience could guide, but execution was hers alone. "Whenever you're ready," Hale said softly, almost reverently. His eyes narrowed slightly, focus absolute. She slowly exhaled, letting her body settle into the rifle. The trigger pressed gently under her finger, building tension before release. And then the rifle barked. The recoil jolted through her body, immense and thunderous, yet absorbed it perfectly, her body aligned and controlled. The shot was fired. The bullet streaked across 4 kilometers of open air, invisible to the naked eye, carrying with it months of preparation, years of study, and a calmness that belied her age and experience. Hale's breath caught. The Marines around them instinctively leaned back, shielding eyes, some gripping their helmets, others frozen mid-step. The magnitude of what she had attempted was staggering. This wasn't just a long-range shot. This was nearly unprecedented. The physics alone would challenge even the most experienced snipers, and yet had executed it with remarkable precision. "Follow through," Hale muttered to himself, almost as much to steady his own nerves as to guide her. Held the rifle steady, keeping her eye on the scope, ensuring that any minor vibration or movement didn't affect the outcome. She exhaled slowly, her finger still on the trigger, letting the rifle settle back into alignment after the recoil. Every microsecond mattered. The other Marines couldn't look away. Even Hale, who had instructed countless elite snipers, felt a mix of awe and disbelief. His calm composure, her attention to detail, and her silent confidence had turned a routine training exercise into an unprecedented test of skill. Some of the veterans whispered, shaking their heads. She's actually doing it," one said. Another muttered, "No one hits that on a first attempt." His gaze remained locked on the scope, following the imagined flight path of the bullet. She visualized the air currents, the subtle sway of the target, and the tiny influences of gravity and wind over the 4-kilometer journey. Every detail she had studied, every calculation she had memorized, converged in this single moment. The silence of the range was almost unbearable, each second stretching like hours. Then a faint glimmer, a subtle spark of movement on the distant steel target. Hale leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing what had happened. Shot had connected. The bullet had struck the target with remarkable precision, a lower quadrant hit, nearly perfect at an unimaginable distance. The Marines erupted into stunned shouts and applause, unable to contain their amazement. Even Hale, for once speechless, shook his head in disbelief. Blinked, slowly processing what had occurred. Her finger relaxed on the trigger, and she lowered the rifle gently. The magnitude of what she had just accomplished began to sink in. She had executed a shot that few snipers ever attempted, and even fewer ever achieved on a first try. Hale approached her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of respect from a man accustomed to giving orders rather than praise. You actually did it," Hale said, his voice a mixture of awe and incredulity. "Most people wouldn't even come close at this distance." His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "I tried to account for everything," she said softly, her voice steady but betraying the slightest hint of exhilaration. "I visualized the trajectory, adjusted for wind and mirage. I focused." Hale's Marines crowded around, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Some clapped her on the shoulder, others shook their heads in disbelief. The quiet volunteer who had arrived at the range that morning to pick up brass had just performed an impossible feat. The steel silhouette target, now dented from the round, was proof that its combination of observation, preparation, and focus had produced extraordinary results. Hale's hand remained on her shoulder. "You understand now what it takes to shoot at extreme range," he said, almost as a statement to himself. "Most people spend years learning what you just executed in one attempt." Nodded, still absorbing the moment. Her body hummed with adrenaline, but her mind remained unusually calm. She had prepared for this mentally, but experiencing it physically was an entirely new sensation. The combination of fear, excitement, and triumph coursed through her, yet she maintained her focus. The Marines around them were buzzing with conversation, analyzing the shot, debating the trajectory, and congratulating her. Hale's eyes remained fixed on, a mixture of pride, disbelief, and curiosity in his gaze. This wasn't just a lucky shot. It was skill, precision, and preparation realized. His first words broke the silence, quiet yet commanding attention. "Can I try another?" she asked. There was no arrogance, only calm determination. Hale smiled, realizing that the volunteer who had arrived unnoticed at the range had become something far greater, a student of extreme precision, a marksman with extraordinary potential, and a figure who would not be easily forgotten. The impossible shot had been made. The range, once a place of routine practice and casual observation, had become a theater of skill, concentration, and achievement. Carter, once invisible, had become the center of attention, and Hale knew that this was only the beginning. The silence after the shot lingered, almost tangible, as if the range itself was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, and the distant hum of other shooters had vanished. 4 kilometers of air and earth had separated Carter from the steel silhouette target, yet her first attempt had struck it dead on. The other Marines could hardly process what they had witnessed. Some stood frozen, mouths slightly agape, while others ran to the observation monitors, double-checking the target's dent against the scope feed. Gunnery Sergeant Hale remained close, his hand still resting on shoulder, but he didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The quiet expression of determination on her face said more than words ever could. Lowered the rifle gently, her body calm yet vibrating with a mixture of adrenaline and triumph. She hadn't panicked. She hadn't rushed. She had executed every calculation, every micro-adjustment, and every mental note flawlessly. Hale, normally unshakable and unflappable, felt a rare surge of admiration for her composure. The other Marines crowded around the monitors, checking the footage. That's impossible," one muttered. "No one hits that on a first try." Another shook his head in disbelief. Hale's heart pounded with a strange mix of pride and awe. He had pushed a civilian to attempt the impossible, and she had done it with methodical precision. He could feel the collective respect growing in the room, and he knew this was a moment that would be remembered by everyone present. Watched the monitor calmly. Her eyes flicked between the target and the screen, analyzing the shot as though she were reviewing a diagram. The dent in the steel reflected the exact spot she had aimed for. She had done everything she could to control variables, but even she had not been certain the outcome would be this precise. The thrill of accomplishment coursed through her, yet she didn't smile widely or boast. Satisfaction came from the perfection of execution, from the culmination of preparation meeting reality. Hale finally spoke, his voice low but charged with emotion. "You understand now why we train for years, why even the most seasoned snipers hesitate at this range." He gestured toward the monitor, showing her the distant steel target. "And yet, here you are. You just did what many will never achieve in their lifetimes." Nodded, her mind processing the enormity of the moment. "I focused on the trajectory," she said quietly. "Every factor I could control I accounted for. The calculations were all in my head. I visualized the bullet's path from rifle to target. I didn't rush. I executed." Her calm tone belied the adrenaline racing through her veins. She hadn't felt fear, she had felt purpose. And purpose had guided her hands with a precision that few could match. The other Marines began to gather around her, some hesitantly, others more openly, asking questions, offering congratulations and seeking advice. Hale watched, observing their reactions. It was rare to see professionals genuinely awed by a civilian's skill, but had achieved it effortlessly. Her ability to combine quiet observation with applied theory had elevated her from a volunteer to someone worthy of serious respect in their eyes. One of the younger Marines, still skeptical, stepped forward. How did you know where to aim, even with calculations that distance?" His voice trailed off. Turned to him, her expression patient and calm. "I studied every factor," she explained. "Wind, air density, mirage, gravity, even the rotation of the Earth. I visualized the path before firing. I focused on what I could control and ignored what I couldn't." The Marine's eyes widened. "You actually did all that in your head?" Nodded. "I did. Theory becomes practice when you prepare." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience and preparation. Hale smiled subtly. He had always known the difference between raw talent and disciplined skill, and had demonstrated both in spades. Hale turned to the entire group. "What you just witnessed isn't luck. It isn't chance. It's preparation, discipline, and the calm execution of skills. Understood the rifle, the physics, and the environment. She visualized the shot before it was ever fired, and then she executed flawlessly." The Marines murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Others silently reviewed their own calculations, wondering if they could have achieved the same result. Hale's words carried weight, but performance spoke louder. The quiet volunteer who had spent her weekends collecting brass had transformed into someone capable of extraordinary precision. The room's energy shifted from skepticism to awe, admiration, and inspiration. For her part, remained composed. She didn't bask in the attention. She simply stood, analyzing her first shot, learning from it, and preparing herself mentally for the next. Her focus was unwavering, her calm unbroken. She had accomplished something extraordinary, but she knew that every successful sniper relied on continuous learning and refinement. Hale recognized this immediately. He had seen many shooters, veterans and novices alike, who were satisfied with one lucky shot. Was different. She sought mastery, not recognition. The silence of the moment was punctuated by the subtle clicks of the observation equipment as other Marines reviewed the shot from multiple angles. "It's perfect," one veteran whispered. "She nailed it. Every adjustment was spot on." Another added, "And she didn't flinch once. That takes nerves of steel." Hale nodded in agreement. His ability to remain calm under pressure had amplified the effectiveness of her calculations. Hale finally stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, most people will never even come close to this. They'll practice for years, and even then," he trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. simply nodded, understanding the gravity of what she had accomplished. She didn't need the praise, she needed the challenge, and she had met it head-on. The other Marines now approached more openly, some clapping her on the shoulder, others shaking her hand. "You've got the mindset of a sniper," one said, voice full of respect. "And the discipline, that's rare." Accepted the acknowledgement with quiet gratitude. Her mind was already reviewing the shot, mentally noting minor adjustments for future attempts. She wasn't finished. This was just the beginning. Hale placed a firm hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze. "You've changed how we'll look at this range forever," he said. "Not because of what you did, but because of how you did it. Precision, patience, focus. That's everything." Exhaled softly, feeling the adrenaline ebb, replaced by a steady clarity. The accomplishment was immense, but she remained grounded, thinking only of what came next. Her first shot had been successful, but she knew mastery required consistency, adaptation, and relentless learning. Hale's presence reassured her that guidance and mentorship were now possible, and she was eager to continue refining her skills under his watchful eye. The range slowly returned to normal activity, yet the memory of the shot lingered like an echo. The Marines moved with renewed focus, inspired by what they had just witnessed. Hale remained close to, his mind racing with plans for training, mentorship, and future challenges. The quiet volunteer had not only proven herself, but had also transformed the atmosphere around her, inspiring awe, respect, and curiosity in everyone present. In that moment, realized she had stepped into a new reality. She was no longer just the girl who picked up brass. She was a markswoman capable of extraordinary precision, someone who could translate study and observation into tangible, awe-inspiring results. The silence before the echo of her shot had revealed more than just skill. It had revealed potential, immense, untapped, and waiting to be explored. Hale finally broke the silence with a grin. "All right," he said, voice calm but full of admiration. "Let's see if we can make that the first of many." Nodded, a subtle smile playing at her lips. The impossible had been achieved once, but the journey, she knew, was far from over. The atmosphere at the range had shifted completely. What began as a routine morning for picking up brass and observing the shooters had transformed into an event that would be remembered by every Marine present. Her first successful 4,000-meter shot had done more than demonstrate technical skill. It had challenged assumptions, altered perceptions, and sparked a newfound respect among soldiers accustomed to evaluating civilians with skepticism. Gunnery Sergeant Hale walked alongside as she slowly moved away from the shooting mat, the massive .408 now carefully returned to its case. "I don't think anyone here has seen anything like that," he said quietly, just above a whisper. His voice carried admiration, but also a hint of awe. Hale had trained the most elite snipers in the Corps, and even he knew how rare it was to witness such a performance. Nodded, calm but internally exhilarated. She hadn't expected such an overwhelming reaction. What had started as a curiosity-driven visit to the range, picking up brass and tidying the stations, had become a demonstration of skills she had honed through observation, study, and quiet practice. She hadn't sought recognition, she had sought mastery. Yet the respect she was receiving felt almost like a validation of years of careful preparation. The other Marines approached cautiously, still a little in disbelief. A senior sniper named Corporal, known for his experience in extreme-range operations, stepped forward. "You understand the rifle," he said, nodding slowly. "But you also understand the shot itself. That's rare, that's more than theory, that's execution under pressure. Very few people can do what you just did." His lips curved into a subtle, self-conscious smile. "I tried to account for everything," she said quietly. "I visualized the shot, adjusted for the wind, and maintained control throughout. It's what I've been studying for months." Hale observed quietly, nodding the interaction. Demeanor, her humility despite an extraordinary accomplishment, had a remarkable effect on the Marines. Respect wasn't given lightly in their world. It was earned through skill, discipline, and composure. And through her calm determination and methodical execution, had earned it all in a single, unforgettable moment. What's more impressive, Hale added, is that she did it on her first attempt at this distance. That takes more than skill, it takes mental discipline. Most trained snipers would hesitate, second-guess, or overthink. Not her. Corporal leaned closer. You could be a student of snipers, you know, that's not a joke. You've got instincts, discipline, and patience that are hard to teach. If you want, we could train you properly. His eyes widened slightly at the suggestion. She hadn't anticipated formal mentorship, let alone from elite snipers like Hale, and yet something in her gut sparked excitement. The idea of refining her skills, learning under the guidance of people who had faced combat and executed shots she had only studied in theory, was irresistible. Hale gave a small, approving nod. I think it's time you learned more than just theory. You've demonstrated you can execute. Now we'll teach you precision under pressure, strategy, field conditions, and real-world adjustments. You've earned it. The words were surreal too. Her weekend spent observing, her careful note-taking, and her quiet study had been solitary efforts. Yet now she was being offered a pathway to learn from some of the most skilled marksmen in the Corps. She nodded solemnly. I'm ready, she said, determination resonating in her voice. The other Marines, once skeptical, now seemed inspired. They began discussing adjustments she could make, subtle nuances in scope alignment, and techniques for minimizing environmental effects. Listened intently, absorbing every detail with the same calm focus she had shown at the range all morning. Hale watched silently, appreciating her ability to learn quickly and apply feedback without hesitation, a trait rare even among seasoned snipers. One of the younger Marines, still a bit awed, asked, "Do you think she could do it again?" Hale chuckled softly. "If she wanted to, yes. But it's not just about repeating a shot. It's about understanding every factor, every adjustment, and internalizing it. That's what makes a sniper exceptional." Took a moment to reflect. She had achieved something extraordinary, but she knew that every shot could be refined, every calculation improved. The range, the rifles, and the distant targets were no longer abstract concepts. They were challenges she could now approach with the insight and guidance of professionals. Hale noticed the shift in the Marines. Their respect was no longer hesitant. It was genuine, earned through skill, composure, and focus. Some whispered among themselves, recounting the shot, analyzing the trajectory, and debating minor adjustments. All of them acknowledged that what they had witnessed was rare, perhaps once in a lifetime. Sensing the magnitude of the moment, allowed herself a quiet smile. She had entered the range as an observer, a volunteer performing simple tasks. Now, she was recognized as someone capable of extraordinary precision, someone worthy of mentorship and guidance from the best snipers in the United States. Hale guided her to a shaded area near the observation tower. "This is where training begins," he said. "We'll teach you how to handle extreme-range shots under various conditions, how to manage fatigue, weather, and the mental strain of pressure. You've proven you can execute once. Now, you'll learn consistency." Nodded, her mind racing with excitement and anticipation. She had always dreamed of mastering long-range shooting, and now she had access to unparalleled resources and mentorship. The thought of learning directly from professionals who had faced combat conditions, executed difficult shots, and trained under extreme pressure was exhilarating. The Marines around them began discussing the logistics of training, planning schedules, and setting up ranges for future practice. Observed quietly, absorbing every plan, every detail, and every subtle nuance of strategy. Hale noticed her attentiveness. "You're not just observing," he said. "You're thinking critically about everything you see. That's how marksmen become great. Not by repetition alone, but by understanding the reasons behind every action." His focus remained unwavering. She asked questions, clarified instructions, and demonstrated a remarkable ability to translate theory into applied knowledge. Hale nodded approvingly. This level of curiosity, combined with composure and methodical execution, was what made snipers exceptional, and now had earned her place among them, not as a volunteer but as a student, a trainee and a marksman in the making. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the range, Hale stood beside and looked toward the distant steel targets. "You've earned their respect," he said, nodding toward the gathered Marines. "But more importantly, you've earned mine. Few people execute like you just did, and even fewer do it with humility and focus." His lips curved into a quiet smile. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. "I won't waste this opportunity. I want to learn, refine, and push myself further." Hale's expression softened. "Good, because from here the training only gets tougher. We'll take you to distances, conditions, and scenarios most people can't imagine, but I have a feeling you're ready." The day ended with leaving the range surrounded by a mix of awe and encouragement from the Marines. They now saw her not as a civilian who picked up brass, but as someone capable of exceptional precision, someone worthy of mentorship, and someone who had earned respect through quiet determination and unparalleled focus. Hale, walking beside her, knew this was only the beginning. His journey had just begun, and the potential she had displayed hinted at achievements far beyond anything the range had witnessed that morning. In the quiet moments after the excitement, reflected on how far she had come. What began as curiosity had transformed into a demonstration of skill, respect, and recognition. She had faced a challenge that many deemed impossible and had succeeded. And now, under the guidance of experienced snipers, she had the chance to grow even further. Weeks had passed since Carter's first extraordinary 4,000-meter shot. The story of her achievement spread quietly at first, from range to range, whispered among Marines and sharpshooters alike. The tale was remarkable not because of the feat itself, which, to many, seemed almost impossible, but because of the precision, calm, and discipline she had displayed. She had entered as a volunteer, picking up brass, and now she was being treated as a markswoman of exceptional potential. Hale watched her progress with a mixture of pride and professional curiosity. Every training session revealed a new layer of skill, a sharper understanding of ballistics, wind calculations, and extreme range adjustments. Soaked up every lesson, every tip, and every correction with quiet focus. She no longer hesitated, no longer questioned her abilities. Instead, she applied what she learned immediately, adjusting her technique, refining her calculations, and mastering the art of precision shooting under various conditions. Her mornings began with physical conditioning, core strength, stability drills, and exercises specifically designed to reduce muscle fatigue during long-range shooting. Afternoons were spent in intense study, analyzing past shots, calculating ballistics, and reviewing environmental factors. Hale introduced simulations under extreme conditions, wind tunnels, variable lighting, and live fire scenarios at distances that tested both patience and accuracy. Adapted effortlessly. One afternoon, Hale stood on the range, observing a new target set nearly 4,500 meters away. The challenge was greater than before, requiring additional adjustments for wind gusts and subtle shifts in elevation. Hale handed her the scope and said quietly, "This is beyond your first attempt. Conditions are variable, unpredictable. Can you do it again?" Nodded, her calm demeanor unshaken. "I'll try. I'll account for what I can and minimize what I can't." Her words were simple, but they carried confidence grounded in preparation and understanding. Hale stepped back, letting her take the lead. She carefully aligned the rifle, studied the flags along the distant ridge, and factored in the slight variations in wind. Her breathing was controlled, her stance stable, and her focus absolute. Hale watched, his heart packing, knowing that at this distance, even a tiny miscalculation could ruin the shot, but had transformed in weeks of rigorous training, and her mind had sharpened to the point where complex calculations were instinctive. The shot rang out. The rifle's recoil thundered through her body, yet maintained perfect follow-through. The bullet streaked across the air, invisible, silent to the naked eye, until it struck the steel target with pinpoint accuracy. Hale exhaled sharply, impressed once more. The Marines watching applauded and cheered. had not only repeated her feat but had refined it, improving her control and execution under increasingly difficult conditions. Word of her achievements spread beyond the immediate training range. Senior officers began taking notice, intrigued by the story of a civilian-turned-trainee executing shots at distances most snipers considered unreachable. Some skeptics questioned the story, assuming exaggeration or luck, but Hale and the Marines who had witnessed her first and subsequent shots knew the truth. Skill was extraordinary, grounded in meticulous study, mental discipline, and relentless focus. Herself remained grounded. She didn't seek recognition or accolades. Her satisfaction came from mastery, understanding, and the continuous improvement of her craft. She studied long after her peers had left the range, reviewing every shot, adjusting for variables she hadn't previously considered, and pushing the limits of what she could achieve. Her quiet determination earned her the respect of everyone who trained with her, from young recruits to seasoned veterans. Hale often reflected on her journey. She had started as a curious volunteer, someone who spent hours picking up brass and observing others at the range. Her potential had been hidden beneath that quiet exterior, unnoticed by most. But through observation, preparation, and disciplined focus, she had demonstrated abilities that many trained professionals could only dream of. Hale realized that was not just a student. She was a living example of what dedication, intelligence, and calm execution could achieve, even in extreme situations. The transformation was not just technical. Presence began to influence the culture at the range. Her humility, discipline, and unwavering focus inspired other Marines. Younger shooters observed her meticulous preparation, her calm under pressure, and her methodical application of theory to practice. Her example encouraged others to approach training with patience, discipline, and analytical thinking, rather than rushing for immediate results. One afternoon, Hale introduced a new scenario: moving targets at extreme range, with variable wind and uneven terrain. Approached the challenge as she had before, quietly, deliberately, and with absolute focus. She calculated adjustments, visualized the trajectory, and executed each shot with precision. The result: nearly every round struck the intended area, demonstrating her growing mastery of both static and dynamic conditions. Hale watched, impressed, realizing that had become not just a student, but a teacher by example, showing others how preparation, focus, and analytical thinking could surpass even instinctual skill. Such achievements eventually drew attention beyond the range. Articles circulated in specialized military publications, praising her precision, calm demeanor, and analytical mind. Snipers and marksmen from across the country studied her technique, eager to learn from someone who had demonstrated such extraordinary skill in a civilian-turned-trainee. Interviews highlighted her dedication, her focus on preparation, and her refusal to rely on luck or shortcuts. Her reputation grew, but she remained grounded, always emphasizing learning, practice, and respect for the craft. Hale, proud but never boastful, often reminded her, skill isn't just about hitting the target. It's about understanding the environment, anticipating variables, and executing with discipline. You've mastered this lesson better than anyone I've seen. Nodded, taking the words to heart, knowing that mastery was a journey, not a destination. Months after her first shot, Hale organized a small ceremony at the range to recognize her achievements formally. Senior officers, instructors, and Marines who had trained with her gathered, stood quietly, accepting the acknowledgement with humility. Hale addressed the group. Carter arrived here as a volunteer, picking up brass and observing others. Today, she is recognized not just for her extraordinary skill, but for her discipline, focus, and the example she sets for all of us. Her journey reminds us that dedication and preparation can overcome limits, and that excellence is achieved not by chance, but by effort and understanding. His eyes met Hale's, and she gave a small, grateful smile. She knew the ceremony was not about personal glory. It was a milestone, a recognition of the dedication and discipline that had brought her this far. Her journey was far from over. She would continue to train, to learn, and to push the boundaries of precision shooting. As the sun set over the range, casting long shadows across the steel targets, Carter reflected on her path. From a quiet volunteer picking up brass to a markswoman respected by elite snipers, she had transformed through focus, preparation, and courage. She had faced what many considered impossible, executed it flawlessly, and inspired those around her. Her first shot had been legendary, but her legacy was being built every day through discipline, learning, and the quiet pursuit of mastery. And in the whispers of the range, among the steel targets and scattered brass, her story endured. The story of a young woman who saw opportunity in observation, who transformed preparation into action, and who left an indelible mark on the world of precision shooting. Carter's journey became more than a single shot. It became a lesson, an inspiration, and a legacy, proving that extraordinary skill could emerge from the most unassuming beginnings, with patience, focus, and relentless dedication.